It is 5:30 p.m. Good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, January 26, 2022. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first meeting of the Complete Streets Commission for 22. And so I'm going to actually quickly go through a roll call here, make sure that we have quorum. And I'm going to start with our Vice Chair, Stacy.
Present.
Great. Suzanne and Bill. I see you.
Present.
Okay, did I hear you? Yes?
Yep, present.
Okay, hello. I know that Commissioner Ouyang is going to be a bit late. Commissioner Venkatraman.
Yeah, present. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Commissioner Kutz. Not yet. Commissioner Geschneidner. Not yet, but we do have quorum, and with that, we will start the meeting on time. With that, we'll take, as usual, 20 seconds to recite in private the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, very well. With that, we move to public comments on items not on the agenda. Again, for members of the public who wish to speak on items not on the agenda, this is your chance tonight to give us your thoughts. You'll have each 3 minutes. Any requests from members of the public to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your hands. Okay, going once, going twice. I do not see any requests. So we will proceed now to the main items of the agenda. And I can see Commissioner Schneidner. And I guess I don't see Commissioner Kutz yet. Steve, if you're on, please announce yourself. Okay, so as you can see, this agenda today is a little bit different than prior agendas. We have a consent calendar, consent agenda. We have 2 items on the consent. Item 1 and 2, work plan and the letter to the City Council in relationship to the work plan. So for the benefit of the Commission and the members of the audience, items on the consent agenda are usually items that have been seen or been studied by members of the Commission, and typically require very little, if any, discussion. And so that's the purpose tonight, that we believe that this is the case. However, if any of the commissioners believe that those items should be pulled out of the consent for more discussions, you will have the chance to say so. Otherwise, the consent calendar will go up for vote, and it will be voted yea or nay as one package. So with that, I'm going to ask the Commission, is there anyone who would like to pull any items from the consent agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone requesting to put any item from the consent agenda. Is that correct? Okay, I'll take silence as a yes. So with that, we will vote on it. By the way, if anyone wants to have clarification questions, that's fine, but please keep them short as clarifications. Okay, I don't see anyone requesting that either, so I'll take it as a yes. Therefore, I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda, items 1 and 2.
I move to pass the consent agenda item, both items 1 and 2 as is, with no changes or amendments.
Okay, anyone who would like to modify it or second it? Okay, how about modifications first? All right, I don't see anyone saying yes. Do I have a second for the motion?
I second the motion.
Very well. Let's go quickly and go who are in favor. Commissioner Banerjee?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Ambiel?
Yes.
Commissioner Ouyang, are you on by any chance? Okay, not yet. Commissioner Venkatraman? I see your hand up. Yes. Commissioner Kutz, are you on by any chance? No, Commissioner Schneider, I know I saw your hand, so I take it as a yes. So, and I will approve it too. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 yes. And then I guess we, 1, 2, 3, 5 yes. 5 yes. Great. With that, items 1 and 2 have been approved, and we move now quickly to item number 3, and that is the Hetch Hetchy Crossing project. And I believe the city staff will go for a presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, Marissa, the podium is yours.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. So hi, everyone. My name is Marisa Lee. I'm the Transportation Services Manager for the City of Los Altos. And our first item tonight is talking about the Hetch Hetchy Trail, which is an existing trail through a part of the city on the north side. And tonight we're going to talk about constructing some ADA compliant ramps to access the trail from 2 of the streets that it crosses. Those 2 streets are Los Altos Avenue and Estrella Way. So this topic will not discuss any changes to the trail itself. No changes to the trail are proposed. It's just the ramps that lead from the street, those 2 streets, to the trail. So this is our outline of the presentation tonight. I'm going to do a little introduction, give some background on the project. We're going to do an overview of the alternatives that are proposed, and then we'll kind of get a little bit deeper into the options. And then we'll take your recommendations and your feedback and your comments. So this is the introduction. This is the location. This is the north side of the city of Los Altos. And you can see, let's see, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Going across the trail. So this is the trail, and these are the 2 locations of the crossings. So the first one we'll talk about is Los Altos Ave, which is here. And we'll get some more photos later of the kind of existing conditions from street view, but just to give you an aerial idea of where things are. This is the first crossing we'll talk about across Los Altos Avenue. And the second one is across Estrella. Los Altos Avenue is more of a connector street. It's a thoroughfare, and Estrella is just 1 block, and it's a dead-end cul-de-sac. So those are 2 things to keep in mind as far as context. And the purpose of this project is to meet ADA requirements, which currently is not the case. We have a set of ramps at Los Altos Avenue that are old, and so they aren't meeting current ADA requirements. And then at Estrella, we have just rolled curbs, so that doesn't meet ADA requirements either. And then while we are doing this construction of the ramps, we want to think about some additional enhancements, and that's what we'll be talking about and hopefully making some decisions upon tonight. So there's some history with this project. The trail is part of the Public Utility Commission right of way. And so in order to make these ADA improvements so that the trail can be more accessible, we have to reach an agreement for an encroachment permit with the Public Utilities Commission. And in the past, we could not reach an agreement with them. And so we weren't therefore allowed to touch the ramp since it was there right away. So in order to kind of accommodate the ADA issue while not having to get an encroachment permit, we talked about the idea, I think a couple of years ago, about a raised crossing. And so that wouldn't touch their right of way, and it would address the ADA issue because we would no longer need ramps to go down to street level because the crossing would just be at sidewalk level. And I know the CSC talked about it back then, and that raised crossing was talked about at Estrella only. I don't believe it was discussed at Los Altos Avenue. And the residents of Estrella were concerned because they thought that bikes would travel too fast across the crossing if they didn't have a grade break, that they could just fly across the raised crossing and then it would be dangerous. So at that time, I understand that the CSC decided to delay the project. That was before my time. So please correct me if anything is not accurate there. So currently the project is in a slightly different place because we have reached an agreement with the Public Utilities Commission, and we are lined up to apply for an encroachment permit with them. City staff has gone ahead and drawn plans for ramps at both locations. Another thing that we would like to consider is we understand that the residents of Estrella don't want a raised crossing. And given the context of the small cul-de-sac that's a dead end, we don't really think a raised crossing is necessary there anyways. However, we did want to bring to you the idea of a raised crossing at Los Altos Avenue. So that could either be ramps that ramp down to street level for the crossing. It could be a raised crossing that brings the whole crossing up to sidewalk level, or in some cases, the ramp goes down and then the raised crossing happens and then it ramps up back on the other side. So these are the existing conditions. On our left, we have Estrella Way. So this is the rolled curb that I was mentioning. This is not ADA compliant. And the plans that are drawn would take this whole area, if you can still see my cursor, down to street level with a ramp that spans the whole width of the pathway. And that's the best case scenario for bike and ped accesses. Oops. You want the ramp to span the whole width of the pathway, because then bikes and peds can kind of have this whole area. Sometimes you'll see a path like this and there'll be just kind of a small ADA ramp here, and that's not what we're proposing. So currently there's a bollard on both sides of the crossing at Estrella. And then on the right, we have the old curb ramps, which are existing at Los Altos Avenue. So as you can see, these look like they were constructed some time ago. They don't meet current standards, and there's no existing bollard at Los Altos Avenue. So we did do a little bit of research into crash data and speed data on these two streets. And Los Altos Avenue did have one recorded incident, a collision between a cyclist and a car. So I talked to the police department about this to get a little bit more info. This image is from TIMS, which is the accident reporting database that maps locations of collisions. So I talked to police department, and they said that the student who was hit was an elementary school student on their way to Santa Rita, and they had been riding and they were crossing at the crosswalk that's currently existing at Los Altos Avenue, and they had dismounted their bike to cross as a pedestrian, and a car came by and collided with the backside of their bike. So it was a minor injury, but still an incident. And I also learned from the police department that speeding issues on Los Altos Avenue are really common. And it's, since it's a thoroughfare and it connects to El Camino Real. Estrella Way is the small dead-end street. So as far as we know, there's no speeding or crash data that we know of. I do know that I've heard that there might be a history of bicycles falling on the rolled curb, since it is kind of steep, but the police department wasn't sure about that. So we have three different proposed alternatives. The ramps will definitely be happening because we need to do those for ADA compliance. This is something that we've received some public feedback about, and something that we do need to take care of. And so we want to tonight get everyone on the same page and move forward, knowing that the ramps do need to happen and that we have some options as far as the other treatments that we can use. So the first alternative is signage and pavement markings. And so this is an opportunity to add kind of the signage and striping that's shown here. So we could, I'll go into more detail later, but that's our first option. The second option would be we could add a removable bollard. And the third option is the kind of offset fencing bike gate that exists in a few other places in Los Altos and some adjacent cities. So we'll talk now a little bit more about the signage and pavement marking option. This is a great way to establish the right-of-way for cars and bikes. So it kind of gives everybody information as they're approaching the crossing, both the cars and the bikes, of who has the right-of-way and who should be yielding and where that should be happening. It gives advance notice that the crossing is coming up. So cars get the advance warning, as you can see here, of the upcoming bike and ped crossing, and there would be advance warning for bikes as well. This is the recommended NACTO configuration, National Association of City Transportation Officials. And this option can be used with or without the bollard. It could also be used with or without the bike fence. So we have some options that we can kind of choose from. And this can be used for an at-grade crossing and a raised crossing. And I will talk about the list of particular signage and striping in a moment. And the cons to this, so kind of what's up top are all the pros. And the cons are that, you know, there's no physical constraint to slow the bikes. So there's the signage and the striping, but if the bike really wants to fly through, they can, because there's nothing to physically stop them. Another con to this option is that unauthorized vehicles could potentially drive onto the path. It would be signed. There's a current existing sign out there now that says no vehicles allowed. Maintenance vehicles do need to access this path. And so that's why the bollard would be removable and the gates could be movable. But in this case, there's nothing blocking the way. So if a car wanted to, you know, break the rules and drive onto the path, they could. So this is a list of the kind of signage and striping possibilities. So there would certainly be a high visibility crosswalk, as you can see in this image here. There would be the bike and ped crossing assembly. So that's what you see here, where it shows, you know, this is standard that comes with the crosswalk in all locations that shows that, you know, here's the down arrow and it shows that this is where the bikes and peds cross. And then there would be yield markings here. So this is that shark's teeth kind of triangular pattern that tells vehicles that they need to stop at that location to yield to bikes. And then there could be the yield sign, which is this one here. It says yield here to bikes and peds. And then there could be an advance warning sign that says bike and ped crossing ahead. So that's what you see here. That would all be for the vehicles. And then for the bicycles, we could add a stop marking and we could add a stop sign. So in that case, you know, the bikes would approach the crossing. The bikes would be told that they need to stop and that the cars yield, right? So in that case, we have the bikes coming to a complete stop and the cars yielding to the bikes. And then we could have a slow crossing ahead sign for the bikes to tell them in advance that there is an upcoming crossing and that they'll want to slow down. And we could also include a sign that says watch for oncoming cars and cross with caution, cars may not stop, which is something that was used in another trail crossing in the area that I thought was a nice touch. So next we will talk about the removable bollard. And again, this could be used in addition to the signage and striping improvements. So a removable bollard, like I said, can be removed so that access vehicles can enter the path, and it would be put back in place when the access vehicles were done so that no other unauthorized cars could drive on the trail. And these do help at slightly slowing bicycle speeds because bikes have to kind of make this lateral shift and they have to, you know, slow down and pay a little bit of attention. And these are commonly used. We have them in Los Altos. This is an image from Los Altos. They're commonly used in other places in the Bay Area, in the peninsula, neighboring cities. There's one of these used at the kind of far terminus of this exact trail, which is on Arrastradero Road in Palo Alto. So they are around. These do come with a con, which is that they do cause the potential that a bike could catch their handlebar on them and crash. And that's definitely something that's widely discussed amongst the bike community. So pros of not letting unauthorized vehicles drive on the path and the con of, you know, potentially hitting your handlebar. And the third option that we're going to talk about is the bike gate, which also exists in a few locations in Los Altos and neighboring cities. This is an image from a neighboring city. So these are the most effective in slowing bikes because they have to do this whole zigzag motion. And they also prevent unauthorized vehicles from entering, and they can open to allow the access vehicles, the maintenance vehicles to access. And we would design this so that there is sufficient space that longer bikes could make it through, because the cons to this alternative is that sometimes a tandem, which is a longer bike, or a bike with a child attachment or an extra cycle can't make it through without dismounting. Sometimes they can't make it through at all and they have to lift their handlebars over the fence. So in light of that kind of major con, we would make sure that this was designed in a way that could accommodate a longer bike by spacing the two gates appropriately. And that's kind of what's shown here. This option, I just did want to let you know, is discouraged by the VTA bicycle technical guidelines and the highway design manual because of that reason of longer bikes not being able to make it. So that's why I still wanted to present it as an option, because I know they exist in Los Altos, and I know, you know, some people support them, and I just wanted to give you that information as well and say that we would, you know, have to design it appropriately if we were going to go with this. So given the two different kind of typologies of the two different streets, I think that, you know, talking about each one kind of separately makes a little bit of sense, as well as, you know, we kind of want to use a somewhat common application for both so that there's consistency. So for Estuary to Way, which is the, like I said, low volume dead end cul-de-sac, we don't want to do the raised crossing, but we think that all of these are good options. My personal recommendation is option 2. So that's signage and pavement markings and the bollard. And we could go with just signage and pavement markings, and we could go with the offset fencing and all of the signage and pavement markings, or we could do the offset fencing with just some signage, kind of like limit the signage and striping a little bit more. So those are some things to think about. And then this is the street view of Los Altos Avenue. As you can see, different typology of street, higher volume through street. This is where PD said there was some speeding, pretty commonly morning and afternoon. And this is where the collision was with the student crossing with their bicycle. So we think that this is a location where a raised crossing could be considered. It would be, you know, maximum 3 inches tall to comply with fire standards. Some pros of the raised crossing is that it makes bikes and peds more visible as they're crossing, because they're, you know, up a little bit higher. It slows the vehicles because they just have no choice but to slow down to go over them. And a con of this option would be that it would take a little bit longer. We would have to get fire approval. We would have to do the, you know, 3D design. And sometimes there are some drainage impacts of a raised crossing when it's continuously raised all the way across. And so that's something that we would have to look into as well. So I think the options here are the signage and pavement markings only, the signage, pavement markings, and bollard, which it looks like this is an updated photo from the other one. I guess there is a bollard here. Or we could do signage, pavement markings, and the offset fencing. And the offset fencing and bollard would only apply on this side, because over here it connects to a sidewalk for a little ways, and then the trail comes down here. So options 1 and 2 can accommodate the raised crossing. I don't think it makes sense to do the raised crossing with the offset fencing. So at this point, we would like to open it up to discussion and get your feedback.
Thank you, Marisa. So let's see if I can see all the commissioners. I'm going to start. Can you please put the Estrelita map, or I guess the Victoria, on the screen?
Sorry, which one?
The Estrelita one. You had a very nice Victoria. Go back up a little. Yeah, one up, one more, one up, one up. There you go. Look up, too far. No, so the next 2 more. Go down, 1 more. There you go. Awesome. Yeah, thank you. All right, so with that, I'm going to actually take questions from the commissioners. All right, Commissioner Ambia, go for it.
I have a couple questions. One is regarding reflective treatments for any kind of barrier or raised crossing or bollard. What's your plan there? This is a heavy night commute route for a lot of a lot of cyclists. I don't know if you've been there at night. So I wanted to understand what your plan is there for any downlighting, for instance, on bollards or fences. And what is your plan for landscaping? One of the problems in this area is the landscaping does get a little overgrown, and it does impede line of sight. And then thinking about the combination, the choke points of these gateways when you're mixing a heavy pedestrian use with a heavy high-speed commuter use. So I'd just like to hear how you are thinking about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's see, first one that you mentioned was reflectivity. All of the striping and pavement markings would of course be reflective to meet current standards. The bollard would have reflective qualities as well. Lighting on the pathway is not something that has been discussed as a part of this project because the main concerns here are the ADA access issues. And so that is something that we could fold into the conversation. The purpose of this conversation, though, is more just, to get the access piece moving. And landscaping, I'd say, falls under that as well. We have heard complaints about the landscaping situation, and that is not really part of this discussion, which is more focused around access. Was there another thing that I missed at the end? I know there was something about the choke points. Can you repeat that part of the question?
Yeah, I'm checking my list here. Reflective treatments, landscaping, and the downlighting. Thank you. You addressed my questions.
Okay, great. I think that, you did kind of raise an interesting question about the choke points. I think that another con of that offset fencing option would be that then you have bikes and peds who have to mingle in a smaller space. And that would be, more difficult when you have both modes and at the same time approaching the choke point. So I think that would be another, kind of vote for the bollard option, because then you just have more space available.
Okay. Steve?
Just a quick question. I ride that bike path, Palo Alto, often, and I think the striping is clearly understandable as to what that will do in terms of enabling both bike and pedestrian traffic. And I assume that striping and the pedestrian walkway is proposed for both Estrelita and Los Altos Avenue, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what what value the bollards will add? That's the part I'm not quite getting.
Yes, the bollards prevent unauthorized vehicles from driving on the path, and that's kind of their main pro. They also slow bikes down a little bit because bikes have to kind of slow down. Can you see my mouse over here?
Yeah.
So bikes have to kind of slow down to navigate this kind of lateral shift to go around the bollard. And that was a complaint that we got from residents in the past, was that bikes might travel, quickly through the intersection, and it could be a hazard for a, bike car collision. So those are the two pros of the bollard. And the con of the bollard is that you'd have the potential to catch your handlebars on it as you're navigating it on a bicycle.
Yeah, thank you. The one thing I will mention, and it's a comment, probably more than a question, is that at the curb there at Estrelita, where it transitions from the bike path to the road, is so steep that when I take it, I always have to take it at an angle so that it doesn't feel like I'm actually hitting a solid wall if I'm moving at any speed at all. And sometimes, because there is not, I mean, cars don't, I see a car on the road on Estrelita, I'll move pretty quickly across or I'll wait. But if I move quickly across and I hit that curb, you can actually, it's a jarring experience. So
This curb here, you mean, right?
Exactly. And so I don't know whether you're proposing to do anything to soften that with a similar kind of ramp that you have at the Los Altos Avenue side.
Yes, yeah, so that is the part of the project that is 100% set, is that both of these will be reconstructed. on both sides of each street. So, and that'll be to meet ADA compliance. This is a rolled curbs, so it's not ADA compliant at all. So all of this would be taken out and reconstructed. And then this is just an older ramp. So this would be reconstructed as well in a similar way.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I had a couple.
Tom, go ahead.
Okay, on the removable bollards, are they pretty easy to remove? In other words, if, say, somebody wanted to drive on there, could they actually just pick it up and start driving, or are they locked in place? Only city maintenance could use them? And the question about people catching the handlebars, are there different heights available that we could pick and choose, like 3 foot, 2 foot, and so on?
So good questions. The first answer is that yes, these are locked in place. So usually there's kind of a little bit of a footing down here that's bolted to the street or to the ground, and then this part comes out, and usually it's locked at this point with a kind of deadbolt type lock. And so the maintenance vehicle can kind of come through and use their key to take it off. So that's how it usually works. And the second question was different heights. Yes, I know there are different heights available. So that could be a good thing to kind of look into if we do go with the bollard option.
Okay, thank you.
Just, may I comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Steve.
I don't know whether anybody has reported any experience with any kind of motorized vehicles on that bike path. In all the years that I've been using it, and that's been a lot of years at different times of the day, I don't ever bike at night on it, but I do during the day. I've never experienced any other kind of a vehicle except bikes and lots of pedestrians on the path. The one thing that I would say is that it's a relatively short stretch before you then cross Estrelita and go into onto the path that goes towards Gunn High School in Palo Alto. And then you have to go across a relatively narrow wooden planked bridge that no vehicle could possibly get across unless it's a bike or a pedestrian. So I think the bollards would do a good job of slowing bikes down as they approach the streets. And I think that has some value. I think that the risk of a car or any kind of a all-terrain vehicle on the bike path is, the incident of that is almost unheard of in my experience.
Yeah, there are bollards out there now existing. So there's this one here, and that's on both sides of Estrelita. And like we found out earlier, this was an outdated photo. So there is now one here also on Los Altos Avenue. So it could be that that is the reason why we don't ever see, vehicles joyriding on the path. Also, it could be, just kind of locally known that that's not allowed, but there have been a couple, nationwide, there have been a few kind of high profile incidences of vehicles on bike and ped paths that resulted in injury and death. And so it's something that is, kind of talked about now, unfortunately.
Okay, Suresh, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I think I had a similar question to Tom, so I got my question answered. But I do have an additional question just to clarify and follow up on what Commissioner Steve was saying. The ramp the ADA compliant ramp would extend how far back from the street?
I don't know off the top of my head. We do have the plan, so I can look for those later and get back to you. But the ramp is not too deep. It's just kind of deep enough to meet the ADA slopes that are necessary. So probably it would go a little bit farther than what's pictured here, and it would extend the whole width of the path. So it would probably kind of take this shape here.
And what's the proposal to put a stop sign in the signage? How far back would the stop sign for the bicyclists be placed?
The stop sign, let's see if we can get that image back. It would be probably about, hold on, let's see. So here is an image from another location. This one isn't quite accurate to what we would do because we would have the ramp that would come back this direction. And so that would probably take up about 6 feet, and then the bike stop would be behind it. So this is all kind of at the same grade, so it's closer. So I don't think this is quite what we would have. But I think this image is a good one. So this is this, you know, kind of similar to what we just looked at in that other image. So this is a raised crossing, so this doesn't slope down. So I'd say that the stop bar would probably be about 10 feet back from the face of the curb.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Oyang, do I see Cindy? Not yet. Stacy, go ahead, please.
I have one question. Marisa, have we heard feedback with respect to the Los Altos Avenue, or the path at Los Altos Avenue? Is there a lot of conflict between pedestrians walking along Los Altos Avenue and cyclists coming on and off this pathway? And if we don't have that feedback, would you expect that there's a lot of conflict there?
I have not heard feedback on that topic. I don't know if anyone else who is on the call tonight has heard more than I have. I wouldn't expect that there would be a lot of conflict there between bicycles and pedestrians.
Okay, Steve, before I get to you, I want to make sure that everybody else has a chance to speak. So Cindy, go ahead if you have any questions.
No, sorry, I just joined the meeting.
Okay, great. Steve.
No, I was just going to say that I think that I would agree that there is probably not a lot of conflict.
Let's keep it to questions for now. We'll have the comments later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, other questions from the commission? Okay, Marissa, I have a few questions for you. So can you go back, please, to the Estrelita Victoria?
The existing conditions or the...
Yeah, that's one. That's a great chart. Thank you. Yeah, one. So can you help me understand the jurisdiction? Where does the Los Altos jurisdiction begin and end, and where does the Hetch Hetchy, I guess, San Francisco, their jurisdiction begin and end?
That's a good question. I don't know if Jaime or Jim are on the call right now, if they know off the top of their heads. If we need the encroachment permit to do the ramp, which is, you know, right at the face of curb, I would imagine that our jurisdiction ends at the edge of the roadway and that there's, you know, starts at that location.
That's my understanding. Our right-of-way goes up to the back of the roll curb.
So that section where the Hetch Hetchy Trail, I guess, where the pipes are, and Estrelita intersect, that portion on the road, is that ours or theirs, or is it joint?
It's on Estrelita itself, from rolled curb to rolled curb, it's our jurisdiction. So when the PUC does work in that area, they need a permit from us. But
Okay,
when it's on the path, we need a permit from them.
got it. And so our maintenance then is only over the street. So the maintenance of the trail is not our responsibility.
Well, our agreement with the PUC is that we maintain the trail and the vegetation on the path.
Oh, okay. And what about the signage on the trail itself?
If it's trail related, it would be our responsibility. If it's pipeline related, it's the PUC.
Okay, so therefore, I take that as we do have the opportunity of putting signage on the trail itself. Okay,
Right.
Thank you. Second question, Marisa, can you describe to us how did Palo Alto deal with it on the other end where it gets to Arrestadero? What did they do?
Pull up an image. I know they have a bollard, and then they have kind of a nice design that gets bikes from the roadway on the far side through a little kind of like bike only left turn lane onto the trail. So,
And so do we have any feedback from Palo Alto on how effective it's been vis-a-vis pedestrians, cyclists, residents?
Not that I've heard, but that's something that we could definitely reach out to them and ask about.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to just sort of get their view on how it's worked or not worked for them. Okay, and then on that chart that you have here in front of us on the screen, I see yellow lines. Are these just simply just yellow lines, or are they the plastic bumpy? Sometimes you see them on the ramps.
This here?
Yeah.
Truncated domes, I think is the technical term, Nadim.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Those truncated domes are required. It's like a tactile surface that's required as part of the ADA requirements. I know in Los Altos, we use a more of a kind of patina metal as opposed to the yellow. So I would imagine that in this case, it would be the same patina metal material that's used elsewhere.
And so would they slow down a bike by any chance? Would that be effective at slowing down a bike?
When I approach them on my bike, I usually slow down a little bit, yeah, but not significant, not to a huge degree.
Okay. And the last question is, does the VTA have any standards for these bike trails / street intersections?
The VTA does have some guidelines. They recommend more of the signage and striping approach. They recommend a bollard if it's perceived that unauthorized vehicles do enter the trail, and they do not support the offset fencing.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So with that, actually, I'm gonna now open it up for questions from the members of the public. Please raise your hand electronically. If you're on the phone, just state your name and we'll take a record of you and put you in the queue. So let's start. I'm gonna give the members of the public just a few moments to click on raise your hand. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a blue hand. Click on it if you wish to speak. Okay. We have one request from Carol. Go ahead, please, Carol. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, yeah, my name is Carol Sheets and I live on Margarita Court. That's the street adjacent to the Los Altos Avenue crosswalk. And so I was listening to what Marissa said, and certainly on a weekly basis, maybe even multiple times a week, we have emergency vehicles, fire trucks going to Bridgepoint, down to Bridgepoint. So I know you're going to need to talk to them about if you want to do some kind of raised, raised crosswalk. I'm really kind of opposed to that because I don't think that will slow the bikes down at all. And I am more in favor of a bollard, or what really slows the bicycles down is the offset fencing. So that's my opinion. I've been here for a long time. I use a Hetch Hetchy pathway probably daily. And that's my opinion, is that the raised really is not going to do what we think it's going to do to slow the bikes down, and instead, bollards or the offset fence is probably a better way. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Alon?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for holding this meeting. Just first of all, a note before I was very fortunate to just find out that Google Line's campus just on the block southwest on Charleston and North Shoreline Boulevard has more than all of these options that are already implemented. And so I went there and I explored all 3 options. So if you go, again, the block that is that's north of 101. So between North Shoreline Boulevard and Charleston Boulevard, just the block kind of southwest of that. There is Shorebird Way there, traverses the entire the Google complex that is called the Charleston campus, and has these raised crossings. So to formulate your opinion better about this, you can all go there and experience this from the driver's side and from the bike side. It added a lot to what I think about the solutions now. And then just on the west side of the block, there's a permanent creek trail that has a couple of the other solutions. So on the north side of it, there's the Bollards, and along 101 and to the south of it, there are the offset fencing. And what I saw there as a result is that the raised crossing is doesn't affect you much when you cross it in a car, because the street kind of narrows for it. So it's kind of natural a way to, it's not like a speed hump. It's much more traversable, and it's not a big obstacle. And as a bike, it makes it much safer because you have the stop sign and everything, and you don't need to handle an obstacle before you have to engage with traffic. So if you have an obstacle like you have with the offset fencing of Bollard, you're so engaged with the obstacle that you don't pay attention to the crossing cars as much. While with the raised crossing, you are safer because you have all of your attention paid to the street because of the signs. The offset fencing is another potential solution. I see why VTA is against that, because this is tricky. Even not on my cargo bike, which would be just impossible, or with my kids in a trailer, even just on a regular commuter bike, it is extremely tricky to traverse it by myself, not to mention when there's pedestrians or maybe other people on bikes coming the other way, where I don't know what the thinking was, but permanent creek trail, as beautiful as it is pretty much not very usable for many modes, just because of this offset fencing. Okay, yeah, sorry for taking so much time. Thank you for hearing me.
Great, thank you. Ramesh Nakra? Ramesh, you're next.
Okay. Well, I live on Estrelita Way towards the cul-de-sac area. And I've lived there for about 42 years now. And I use the bike path very much for my morning walk and evening walk. Couple of questions I have. Firstly, regarding the electrical vehicles, the bicycles that use this path. I have no problem with regular bicycles being fitted with a battery, but I do see every morning a very heavy duty bike speeding along the bike path, turning left on Arastradero and then left on Miranda. And by the time I reach Miranda, that same bike is back on the other, going towards Los Altos, towards the bike path again. So it seems to me that this person is using it as a shortcut for some delivery services. And I would like to know, how do we prevent such heavy duty electrical bicycles?
Thank you, Ramesh.
I also have a second question, but please.
Go ahead, yeah. No, we're not gonna, it's not a dialogue. We take your questions and we'll address them separately.
Okay, the second question would be, could you please explain how the water from the cul-de-sac will flow towards the drain entrance at the end of Estrelita Way? Is there going to be an impact or collection of leaves, because there's a lot of foliage on at least on 3 sides of the crossing?
Great, thank you. We'll take those into consideration in our deliberation. Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you.
Terry Couture, next. 3 minutes, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you for the time to speak. I think the offset fencing is great for people who follow the rules. I think it's very tough for little kids who aren't used to biking. They sometimes get scared and then they fall off their bike. So that's a concern for me. The raised sidewalks work great in Palo Alto. My concern is the island in the middle with the raised concrete. I don't know if any of you, the rest of you have witnessed, but those raised signs in the middle of the crosswalks are demolished minimum once a week in my neighborhood. And then we have to replace them, and it's very expensive to replace them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Terry. Aris?
Yeah, so just as a clarification, you initially asked for questions and then people seem to be doing comments. Is this the time for comments, or will comments come
You
later?
can put questions or comments, but you simply cannot discuss them live with you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that the offset fencing doesn't seem to be heavily considered as an option, because I use this path as a pedestrian, and my biggest concern is just the aesthetics of it. I like how it's a nice open sort of community feeling path, and it doesn't feel like you're in a big city or something. And offset fencing would really make it feel like it was like closed off, and would also make it a bit harder to navigate. But the bigger concern for me is just that it would make it feel in a way that I don't want our community to feel. But I do understand the need for safety, and I think bollards would be fine. Although bollards, I do kind of like the ones that were wooden that were on one of those slides. That looks a bit nicer, but whatever works. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aris. Scott Pietka. 3 minutes. Scott?
I'm unable to find the hand, and I wanted to make a comment.
Jerry, you'll be next in line. So
okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, looks like Scott disappeared. All right, so JP.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Scott, go ahead. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for that. Thank you, Marissa, for the presentation and the options clearly laid out. As for other examples that we could look at in the city, is there anything else similar or mimicking that has already been built in Los Altos that could be replicated? I know you've spoke about other cities nearby, Palo Alto and the like, that have similar examples. So I guess as we talk more, I'd be interested to know if there's any information or research that might show like the effectiveness of maybe safety balanced with the community use and openness.
Good question. Am I supposed to respond to Nadeem, or should I not?
Yeah, go ahead. It's fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
The one image that I had of the two wooden bollards here, this is in Los Altos. So this is kind of what it could look like. And then the two images of the existing conditions at these locations that show the bollards. Also in Los Altos, so that is this one here, which you can see in the corner. So there are a couple applications of bollard, and then there are also a couple applications of offset fence. I know I saw one on a path in Los Altos recently, and I forget exactly where it was. It was adjacent to a school. I forget what street it was on. So both exist.
Great, thank you. JT.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. One thing that I think should be taken into consideration that's very unique about the Los Altos Avenue place is the trail actually ends there, and the bike path continues either up or down Los Altos Avenue. And so a raised crossing makes no sense there, because what we really probably want, and I've seen this happen many times at that crossing, is bikes will come flying across and not realize that that's a decision point where they need to stop and decide to either go down Los Altos Avenue or up Los Altos Avenue. And they'll go flying into that intersection and then realize, whoops, where do I go? And I think I can understand why people don't like the staggered gates, and I understand that, but something like that, or a solution like that, where it slows people down so they realize, okay, the bike path continues on Los Altos Avenue, is better than making it look like it's a thoroughfare going across Los Altos Avenue.
Great, thank you, JT. Jerry, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm Jerry Rosamund. I live on right next to the path on Estrelita Way on the north side. Our concern always has been that we have some kind of mechanism for slowing the bikes down, and it sounds like that's been thoroughly discussed. Now what I want to be sure I understand is what will be the structural changes to the street? Are you going to actually put an island in the middle of the street?
No, there will not be an island proposed.
Well, your picture shows an island there.
Yeah, these images I should have mentioned are from NACDO. I think maybe I did mention that. NACDO puts together kind of renderings of typical street conditions, and that we can use to kind of get an idea of what it would look like. I should have mentioned that in my presentation.
Well, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about putting signs there. Anyway, so from the point of view of the automobile, there'll be a slight hump over the elevated path. Is that correct?
So that is an option to talk about the raised crossing at one of the locations, at the Los Altos Avenue location at Estrella Ave. I don't think that that's a good option, so I don't recommend that there, but I do think we could talk about it for Los Altos Avenue.
Well, so in effect, it just seems like you're getting rid of the curved rolled curve and making it a smooth ramp, basically.
Yes, that's right. That's kind of the purpose, and what kind of kicked off the project is the need to remove the rolled curb there and construct more of a ramp.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had to add.
Great. Thank you. Morgan?
Hi, I live across the street from Jerry, and so I spend a lot of time in the yard watching bikers going across the street. And I think, what Ramesh said earlier is there's a lot of bikes that go very fast through here. And even though the rolled curb's not ADA compliant, a lot of people still motor through, and e-bikes are even worse. And we already have the bollard, and it doesn't really seem to do a lot. And so we're concerned that just creating a ramp will exacerbate that situation so that those bikes can go even faster. And I know myself and Jerry, some of the neighbors have talked about the offset fence potentially being a really good solution there, because even though when we drive, we slow way down, there's a kind of a curve on the Palo Alto side that comes around the vegetation. It's really difficult to see anybody, even if you're stopped. And so I think, in my opinion, slowing down the bike should be a primary concern to prevent something really bad from happening, which I think is what all of us that live on the cul-de-sac are concerned about. And I think the difference between this intersection of Los Altos is everybody knows a lot of cars are on Los Altos, so regular bikers tend to slow down. And so I think it's really that potential for an accident that concerns me a lot on Estrella. So I would prefer the offset fence very strongly compared to a ramp, which I think would make things worse.
Thank you, Morgan. Marissa, can you please address 2 points? There are 2 questions that came up. The first one is the speed. Is there a speed limit or perhaps a limitation on the kinds of bikes or vehicles that can traverse the pathway?
Speed limit or types of bikes for the pathway. We have not talked about, speed limits for bikes is hard to enforce, obviously. I think it could be maybe possible to put up a speed limit sign for bikes. Most bikes don't really know what speed they're going since they don't have a speedometer built in. So I don't know that that would really be an effective solution. It's also not one that I've seen in my experience. And the types of bikes allowed on the path is not a part of this discussion.
Okay. And then the second question is, can you comment on the drainage? Or I guess, is that something that will be happening later?
The drainage would be unimpacted on Estrella because the existing flow line would remain. The flow line is the term for the low point here where the water flows. And so the proposed ramps are designed so that that would stay as it is. And so the water would keep flowing as it is. Drainage does become a question if we consider one of the 2 types of raised crossings for Los Altos Avenue. But drainage is a top priority. And so if something that's proposed creates a drainage issue, the issue is either solved or the option is thrown out. And that's just kind of engineering perspective and standard practice. And I also realized there's part of Scott's question that I did not answer, which was regarding kind of like studies or research on the various different treatments. And the answer to that is that no, that doesn't really exist. What does exist is the guidelines, which I've mentioned here in terms of the pros and cons, and guidelines are produced by lots of different entities. So NACTO really, cares about bicycle and pedestrian experience, and the VTA bicycle guidelines addresses that, and even the Highway Design Manual has chimed in on it. They don't always mention, bike and ped concerns, but in this case they did. And then the other side of the various different options is personal preference. So to that regard, I don't think you will find a single bicyclist out there who is going to have a preference for the offset fencing. I think that's kind of more of a driver preference, but it all comes down to who you are and how you're using the roadway.
Okay, great. Last chance for any members of the public to speak. I don't see any more requests. So with that, I'm going to bring it back to the commission. Can you please put slide 11 back on the screen, Marissa? I think that's sort of where perhaps I'm a bit confused on what we're trying to do. So the bottom part, this is Estrelita or El Monte is the proposed idea on the bottom picture.
On the bottom picture is a raised crossing. So I think that, these are the renderings that are done by NACTO. And so they kind of show different design options and kind of, various pieces. And I think what we would want to do is pick from these. So the one on the bottom shows a raised crossing, which we are only suggesting to be considered for Los Altos Avenue. And I think Alon made some really good points about, that kind of making the bike and ped experience much easier and more natural. It, lifts the bikes and peds up so that they're more visible to the cars, gives them a more continuous pathway. And you don't have to, navigate the, the bollard or the fence. And so you have more attention to be paid to kind of navigating the traffic. I think those are all really good points. And then another resident I know made the comment that, some bikes will want to come off the path and turn onto Los Altos Avenue. And so, that's a consideration. They could definitely ride down the ramp of the race crossing. It could be a little bit tight as well. I know the bike lanes there aren't super wide and there isn't a buffer. So making that turn, I don't think would be impacted by the raised crossing. I think it would be the same as making the turn if there was no raised crossing. And then I think the top one is a little bit more akin to what would happen on Estrellita. And, Estrellita is a small residential street, so perhaps this trio of signage wouldn't be necessary on Estrellita. Maybe that would be more of a Los Altos Ave consideration. So put those down here. But we could, pick some of these for each location as they make sense for the context.
Okay, that's much better. Okay, thank you. That's useful. Great. So I am gonna bring it back to the commission for deliberation now. So I see Tom wanting to speak. So Tom, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a following question on the offset fencing. Is there a standard distance between the two fences, or could we, if you install those, could you make the fences farther apart? So instead of like 10 feet, maybe 20 feet, 30 feet. I know if you get too far, it defeats the whole purpose, but if you make it bigger, you could get more of those longer bicycles through there.
Yeah, I think there is a sweet spot there. And like you mentioned, if they're too far apart, then it doesn't really achieve the purpose. I also do agree with the resident who said that the offset fences kind of change the feeling of the experience. I think that's a really good point, and I've kind of felt that way when I'm on a path that has the offset fences. You feel a little bit closed in, and it's not the same, kind of free and free-flowing experience of being on a trail that doesn't have it. And so that's kind of the point of this diagram here, which I believe came from the VTA bicycle guidelines. And so it also mentions the reflective coating here to answer Suzanne's question. But yeah, so the offset has to be long enough for tandems and trailers. So to answer your question, yes, I think, and what I was, I think, mentioning in the beginning of the presentation is if we go with this option, which isn't my personal favorite, we would definitely need to design it so that making it through on a longer bicycle is possible.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
Yes, Marissa, could you put the photo of the intersection at Los Altos Avenue back on the screen for a second? And Nadeem, I guess this is a time for comments, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So when we look at the Los Altos Avenue intersection, what you'll notice is that crosswalk in that photo that's there right now, Marissa, to the bike path, really serves it. A crosswalk to a sidewalk, there's no intersection there. The intersection is offset. And if you look at the size of the bike lane on the side where the bike path starts, where the Hetch Hetchy Trail starts, you can see how relatively narrow it is. So if a bike comes off that path at any speed at all, if it's turning right, going up towards Los Altos Town Center, there's no way to actually make that sharp right-hand turn, so you wind up going into the line of traffic. When
you're talking about this movement here, kind of like
I'm talking about coming off the bike path towards Los Altos Avenue and then turning right towards Town Center into the bike lane. So if you, today, when you hit that, that intersection right there, you either have to turn right or you have to go straight across and turn left into the other bike lane. And so if you're going to turn right, you wind up going out into the middle of the lane. And that's where I think the biggest risk is for a cyclist coming off the bike lane. And that's why I think slowing that cyclist down with a stop sign makes terrific sense to me. The concern I have about making that crosswalk a raised crosswalk is that there are lots of other crosswalks on Los Altos Avenue. And I think motorists are kind of used to having consistency for crosswalks. And to have a whole bunch of not raised crosswalks, and you've got the sweet shop, by the way, just up the street from there, and then all of a sudden to have a raised crosswalk is going to be not only challenging potentially for cyclists, but also challenging for a motorist who doesn't expect to have one there. So I have a little bit of concern about that for sure. And I don't know that unless it was substantially raised, it would do anything to slow a car down. So my thought is that enhancing that crosswalk the way you have suggested doing it with highlighted colors and striping makes a lot more sense. So I like the bollard idea and I like the stop sign idea a lot. I thought there were some really good points made at the Estrelita side in terms of the fact that replacing the rolled curve with an ADA compliant ramp will actually potentially have cyclists going across Estrelita at a much faster speed. And I don't think the cyclists are aware of the blind spot that the resident there talked about in terms of cars, because when you hit Estrelita, it looks like there's really nothing going on there when you're a cyclist going across there. And I think it's very easy for cyclists of any age to speed across that cul-de-sac intersection at Estrelita Way. And if there is a risk there, then I do think that at the very minimum, a bike stop sign would help, although I don't know that they're very much adhered to. And that if they don't work, my vote would be to go with a minimalist approach to see what actually happens, because we can always install offset fencing later on, but once it's up, you're unlikely to ever take it down. So those are a couple of thoughts.
Thank you, Steve. Suzanne, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Let me get my video back on. Sorry, having a little supper at the same time. Thank you for the note about exit speeds. I do believe that is a problem as you exit the pathway onto Los Altos Avenue and make a right-hand turn. I do that quite frequently, and I will tell you this, the bollard does not slow me down one bit, and it won't slow a high school student down, and it won't slow a junior high school student down. They'll just swerve around it. So I'm concerned that the bollards are thought of as a way to slow the bicyclists down. I'm going to be a contrarian, and I'm going to say I really like the offset fences. I use those all the time on the Hetch Hetchy path in Sunnyvale, which is where your picture is from. If you go to that picture, Marissa, that is from the Hetch Hetchy path that traverses two local city streets as you're entering into Mountain View and joining up with the Stevens Creek Trail. Those offset fences do slow a cyclist down, and they do force you to come to a slow speed so that you can check traffic. They do have raised crosswalks there and truncated domes. So they have all of those elements there. For those of you that want to go look at that, please take a look at how that was executed. I think it's important that you have consistent designs at both ends. So looking what Palo Alto did on Arrastradero and what we do on the exit point to Los Altos Avenue, as consistent as possible. Consistency breeds good behavior. And inconsistency is surprising. I think that the slide 11, where you have the illustration, Marissa, from the NACTO guidelines, if you go to that slide, I think that's a little bit misleading because that illustration shows as if there's two-way traffic at Los Altos Avenue. Understand that at Los Altos Avenue, the other side of the street, there isn't a pathway. It dead ends. So you're really only designing for 3 legs of a 4-leg intersection. So with that in mind, does that change your outlook any? Because the sidewalk on that side of Los Altos Ave is undeveloped as opposed to the other side of Los Altos Ave, where there is a wide offset pathway for pedestrians. And like Steve said, the sweet shop is just up the way. So I think that this 4-way perspective, especially on the bottom half, is a little bit misleading. One speaker did mention the confusion about the green islands in the middle. So again, you're only designing for an exit, not an entrance to another part of a trail. So I'm in favor of the raised element, but not for the visibility and for convenience of those crossing Los Altos Avenue. I'm for the raised crosswalk because I will believe it will slow vehicular traffic down. It's not an advantage to a cyclist or pedestrian per se. So that's why I would be supportive of that. I think that on Estrelita, I used to live there, removing those rolled curbs will speed up the cyclist traffic. And if we can actually paint on the pavement, not just signage along the side that people don't look at, but paint on the pavement crossing ahead, that cyclists will see that. That will be helpful, but it won't mitigate cyclists just rolling down that ramp and rolling back the other side. Those curb ramps do make me slow down. The bollards do not. So I'm concerned about that. I'm really concerned about bikes entering into Los Altos Avenue. And then I'm also concerned about if we are responsible for landscaping along that pathway, and PUC has given us responsibility for that, we need to be mindful of that and make sure that there is good line of sight on the ingress and egress, especially at Los Altos Ave. Right now, it's a little dicey, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. All right, who wants to go next? Cindy, Stacy, Suresh. Okay, Stacy.
Thank you. So I just want to, before I get started here, actually thank staff for getting agreement from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and the encroachment permit, because I know when this item was before us last time, there was really an impasse with them. So I just want to say thanks, and I know that's to Jim and all the staff. It is important and essential for us to implement the ADA requirements, and now with that permit, and no pun intended, it paves the way for us. And we should keep focused on that. So regarding Estorila Way, my sense is I liked option 2, signage pavement markings with the bollard. Appreciate that the bollard may be there to keep vehicle traffic out. It also gives a center line, even if it doesn't slow bicycle traffic. I think bicycles are going really fast there. So whatever we can do to look at the landscaping, not only from the visibility of the vehicles, but from the line of sight that bicycles have as they're approaching that crossing, that would be really helpful. In terms of Los Altos Avenue, believe it or not, Suzanne, I think we could also look at the gates as well. Nice looking gates that would work well in Los Altos, but it is the start of the pathway. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic on Los Altos Avenue, including people walking their dogs, and I'm just concerned with bicycles going high speed on that pathway, and it just ends or it begins right there. It is a place where I think there could be a gateway considered, and also just to separate from the pedestrians on Los Altos Avenue. And as Steve pointed out, the space for bicyclists to get safely onto Los Altos Avenue as they exit the pathway. But I think Marisa's right, is just placement of them so everyone can fit through. And keeping in mind there's a lot of two-way traffic as well, not just different types and sizes of bikes. I think that's a summary from me, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, Suresh.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a couple of things to add on to what the other commissioners have said. The goal, I think the goal here is to really slow down the bicycles as they get to the intersections. And I think Commissioner Suzanne was saying is to provide it, I think the key is to provide sufficient time and warning for the cyclists to slow down. One of the reasons why I was asking for where the stop sign was for that reason is 10 feet may not be sufficient. I think the idea of either providing additional signage or even striping warnings on the bike path itself, maybe 50 feet ahead of the intersections would be, given the fact that we have permission to do this from the PUC, I guess it would be something that we should consider. The more the warning, I think your chances of having someone head to the intersection at a high speed, I think reduces significantly. Regarding the gates versus the bollard, I'm conflicted. I think the bollards are probably not going to slow the cyclists down, but feel they're more safe for the pedestrians. So I think this is something maybe has to be a design consideration when you're doing the gates. There's an interesting gates further up on the same path as you go through the other side of Gun High in Palo Alto as you get to Matadero, where there's another intersection there. And I think they have sort of gates, but staggered with like wooden fences kind of thing, which seems more friendly to both bikes and pedestrians, and something to look into, maybe a model similar to what they have there. Regarding the intersection at Los Altos Avenue, again, I think somehow indicating that that bike path ends there, I think is critical. Maybe even a signage that says the bike path ends, even though there's a stagger continuation to the other side. I think it will provide significant warning. Maybe consider, I'm not sure if that's done anywhere, but there's a signage that says that you're heading to an intersection, a major intersection, and the bike path ends, probably would be useful. If you look at that particular intersection, where the bike path ends into Los Altos Avenue, there may be some other interesting design considerations to think about to make way for both pedestrians and bike path. It sort of widens out quite a bit there, and I don't know how much how much space there is to provide sort of a mechanism where you kind of divert the bikes to two sides. So maybe I'm thinking about more like a bollard, but something that's sort of wider. That way you sort of provide both space for pedestrians and bicyclists. If there is a design element, that something like that would be useful. But I guess the goal I'm kind of trying to convey is to clearly indicate that the bike path ends there and that you're heading into a major intersection. Although there's a crosswalk to the other side, what you're really doing there is the end of a bike path, and you have to treat the next stage there as just a walkway or a crossing across the major street. So I think something that indicates that I think would be very useful. Anyways, so those are my comments.
Okay, Cindy.
I don't have any additional comments.
Okay, great. Marissa, thank you for the presentation. Tom, did I miss you? Did I skip over you? I'm sorry. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I have an additional comment.
Okay.
And that was on the offset fencing. I actually agree with what Suzanne was saying, that safety first, and that I like the offset fencing. But one thing we could add to that potentially, I don't think looked at, was over at the Stanford Dish Loop Trail, there are poles or whatever it is to prevent bicyclists from getting in there. So it's only pedestrians and people with like baby carriages to only walk in there. And if you were to put the fence up there and then say on the right side of the path, you could put an area where pedestrians could only go through, and then the bicyclists would have to go around the whole fence. It's just an additional idea that we might look into. Anyway, thank you.
Great, thank you. Marissa, lots of comments here. I think let me share with some thoughts that are non-redundant. So I see three separate and distinct objectives here, and I want to make sure we're not mixing them up. First one is just providing ADA compliant ramps. Let's not forget that. That's number one goal. And that is, I think, can be met by just having ramps that meet the ADA standards. The second separate issue is how do you slow down the bikes as they enter the intersections at Estrelita and maybe at El Monte. I say maybe at El Monte because El Monte is not, there's no path going across from one side to the other. The path ends there. And so I think there's not, the bike flying through the intersection is less of an issue on El Monte. It is a bigger issue on Estrelita. The third separate issue is slowing down the cars in El Monte. And that's sort of, I think, what the raised crosswalk would ultimately do. And I think we should really separate them. So ADA compliance, I think I addressed it. Let's just keep it simple. Just do the ramps. Where most of the discussion has happened tonight has been on the second item, which is slowing down the bikes as they cross Estrelita primarily. I personally am not a fan of the fences because for them to be effective, you got to put them close to each other. And if you put them close to each other, then you're encumbering long bikes and tandems and what have you. And that means you got to separate them. And trust me, the fast bikers will not be impeded by fences that are 10 feet apart. They'll fly through it easily in any case. So I think we need to think of potentially other ways to slow down the bike traffic. I mean, Palo Alto has done a great job across their, my goodness, miles and miles of bike path. And one thing they've done is change the nature of the bike path into an S curve at the end. Actually, if you see that on both ends of that, past the VA, the bike path turns into a bit of an S curve in there. And that naturally slows down. If you put the bollard on an S curve in the bike path itself, that forces the cyclist to slow down. So we sort of, some of the ideas we can think about and consider, can we repave perhaps the last 50 feet of that path in a way that becomes a bit of an S curve instead of a straight line? the signage is important, the maintenance is important. I think we need to also have signage on the bike path itself to provide the bikers with enough warning that they're about to cross the intersection. And also do provide a suggested speed. We cannot monitor the speed, of course, they don't know what the speed is, but folks who are flying on their bikes, whether it's an e-bike or regular bike, they know they're going fast. They don't have to measure the speed, but they know they're going fast. And then the last bit is really what happens on El Monte. I am not a fan of putting a crossed or a raised crosswalk right now, because I'm not sure exactly what we're accomplishing. If we need to reduce the speed on El Monte, we should tackle that as a separate issue. We should basically say, what would it take to measure and reduce the speed of the cars on El Monte? But anyway, I think, and then last comment, by the way, back to the fences. I know that there were suggestions of looking at the Hetch Hetchy Trail in Sunnyvale. I think the nature of the folks who use this trail is going to be different. I suspect that we're going to have students and kids who use this side of the trail more than they would use the Hetch Hetchy Trail. And so I think the adults who can navigate the fences can do fine, but kids may have a tough time actually navigating the fences. So these are, I think, my quick thoughts. So hopefully that's enough feedback for tonight. Is that sufficient for you to sort of go back and reconsider the intersections?
Yeah, I think those are, all great feedback. And I think the question is, do we want to kind of like take a vote and decide on something now, or do we feel good about just offering the feedback and turning it back over to staff?
I think I would suggest that you take that, take the feedback and sort of distill it down and come back with a proposed design, or perhaps a couple of proposed designs. Because I don't see a design right now, I don't see proposed designs. If you can come back to us and to the community with some proposed designs, then we can consider that more rigorously and then take it to a vote.
And just an interjection, Chair. You referred to El Monte several times, and I just want to make sure that people understand that you're not referring to El Monte, but Los Altos Avenue. Not
I'm sorry, excuse me, yes, yes.
I just want to make sure people aren't confused.
Yes,
that we might be
apologies.
designing something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for the correction. Yes, strike that. What I meant was Los Altos Avenue, where it intersects the path, the bike path. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, so with that, it is 7 o'clock. We are on schedule, so let's move ahead to item number 4, the last item on the agenda for discussion.
And Chair Maloof, before we start this item, I just want to say that given the location of real property, I sought guidance from the city attorney today, and based upon that, I will participate in the St. Joseph Avenue item.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair. Great, so Marissa, back to you. I think it's you, right? Is it Jaime?
Pass this to Jaime,
okay.
yeah, who will be giving this presentation and this update on St. Joseph and Ava Avenue.
Thank you, guys. This is Jaime Rodriguez. I'm a consultant with the City of Los Altos in the Transportation Division, and I'm happy to be here tonight. And just want to say, Marisa, you did a great job, and I'm so glad that I've taken a backseat role, as a staff person. And we want to congratulate your success on that last presentation. It was really good. It was a great community discussion. Great job. Okay. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to just move on here to the next item, and I'm going to give an update tonight. Just very quickly, can I get a confirmation that you can see my screen? And that you're seeing the slideshow, not the notes. Great, okay. So we're here tonight to provide an update on the St. Joseph Avenue, Eva Avenue, upcoming street resurfacing project in South Los Altos. This is the neighborhood just to the west of Foothill Expressway. And this is actually a summary of a presentation that we gave to residents in this neighborhood in November of this past fall. And the reason why we're here today is because the city will be resurfacing both St. Joseph Avenue in its entirety from Rancho San Antonio Park near the west end all the way to just before Foothill Expressway at the east end. And at the same time that is happening, the city will also be doing pavement maintenance along Eva Avenue. And the reason for doing that is really to make sure that One, we're doing similar preventive maintenance for Eva Avenue, like we are on St. Joseph Avenue. We do regular treatments like this around the city about every 7 to 8 years when we're doing things like microsurfacing. And when we're doing major roadway rehabilitation, we usually do that about every 15 years. And that's what's happening on the portion of St. Joseph Avenue between Stonehaven and Rancho San Antonio. I'm sorry, Foothill Expressway to Stonehaven is the resurfacing piece and the microsurface is the other. So again, this is a summary of a community meeting that we gave in November. And what we're really going to be doing tonight is providing just an informational report. I do want to acknowledge that there was an error in the mailers that went out for this specific community meeting tonight, but we're not actually asking the commission for any action. And we will be returning to you again next month when we're talking about some of the design work that's launching for this project as well. So we're really here tonight to let you know that we're going to be closing the community outreach portion of the planning phase that we've been working on with residents since last spring, and moving this project into a design phase for the signage and striping work of St. Joseph Avenue and Eva Avenue, and also to let you know that we're starting the sidewalk gap closure project on this project near the Robles Ranch area up to Deodara. So I'll walk you through all that shortly, but here's a quick map of the project area. Everything in blue is a microsurface treatment, and the areas in red are more of a roadway rehabilitation project where we're going to be putting down probably up to about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of new asphalt and compacting that down to provide a smooth roadway surface. This is all work that's scheduled to happen this coming summer. And as a reminder for the commission and people that are watching at home, we actually delayed this project from last summer to this summer so that we had time to go through that community outreach process that we're going to summarize for you tonight. So really quickly first on what we're doing. We've shared this slide before, but just as a reminder, when we're doing major street resurfacing, we're putting down, again, fresh layers of asphalt, compacting that down. Usually in a lot of houses, we do about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of new asphalt. That's what's going to happen on the portion of St. Joseph between Foothill Expressway, or just before Foothill Expressway, up to Robles, up to Stonehaven. And then microsurfacing, we just spread a very thin, about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch slurry. That's just a wearing surface on the roadway. But at the end of the day, this introduces a really nice opportunity to provide new street markings and signage improvements in the corridor to help us implement our new Complete Streets Master Plan that's currently under development. I'm going to walk you through the proposed treatments in a bit, but I just want to highlight some of the changes that are coming out of the last community meeting that are going to be in this presentation here. First, we're going to be reducing the number of proposed bike boulevard stencil treatments, or bike route stencils, on the portion of St. Joseph Avenue along the frontage of Montclair School out to Rancho San Antonio Park. We heard a lot of feedback from residents that they were a little concerned that we were putting too many markings on the roadway, that it was a residential neighborhood. So they asked us to kind of take a look at the amount of markings we're doing and trying to reduce that to be context sensitive towards that community. And so we're taking that feedback to heart, and we made a significant reduction in the number of proposed bike boulevard stencils. We also heard a lot of concern from residents that they wanted to make sure that we were retaining the existing resident-only parking signs that are currently reside along Eva Avenue and St. Joseph Avenue. We do plan to do that. We also plan to remove any of the old faded signs and replace them with new signs. And in areas where we see that there is a little bit more parking intrusion than others for people that are parking in the neighborhood to get to Rancho Center Park, we're going to add extra resident parking only signage to support the community. There was also interest at the time when we presented this at the community. We introduced some new signs that say no park traffic residential area. And at one point when we came to this commission, I think it was in the summer, maybe end of summer, we had discussions regarding maybe those weren't appropriate because it would be confusing, that maybe that also encourages people to not bike to the park. But we heard a lot of feedback from residents that they actually like those signs. We don't feel that will actually deter residents from biking to the park. And so we are keeping those signs as part of this project, and I'll show those all to you a bit later. And then we are going to maintain the no parking 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. recommendations along the portions of St. Joseph Avenue that lead to and immediately in front of Montclair School. to make sure there's an equivalent of a time of day bike lane on the corridor. So I'll walk you through that in a little while, but I wanted to highlight those main changes for you, since I know a lot of the commissioners are already familiar with this project, as are a lot of the people that are watching from home. But for those of you that are not familiar, I'll walk through this in a little bit more slow fashion as part of this presentation. And just as a quick note, all of these recommendations that we're going to walk you through are consistent with our draft Complete Streets Master Plan project. So some of the things that are being proposed as far as treatments along St. Joseph Avenue include a time of day bike lane. That is not an uncommon solution within Los Altos. There is time of day bike lanes throughout the city. This happens to be an example of a time of day bike lane restriction along Covington Road, approaching Block School from Miramonte. And so the types of signage and solutions that you're seeing here are what is being proposed for St. Joseph Avenue from Robles Ranch out towards Stonehaven and along the portion of Montclair School towards the front on St. Joseph Avenue. We are also proposing bike boulevard stencils for an enhanced bike route from Montclair School out towards Robles Ranch. That's why when I mentioned earlier that we are going to be retaining the originally proposed no park traffic residential area signs, that we didn't think that would discourage or deter residents from biking down to the park, because there's going to be a lot of other signage that continue to promote that path. And so these bike boulevard stencils would be new for Los Altos. We don't have any formal bike boulevards in town yet, and it is a proposed element of our Complete Streets Master Plan, and St. Joseph Avenue would be the first deployment of a formal bike boulevard within the city of Los Altos. So really quickly, what I want to do here before we show you and walk you through the concept plan line of St. Joseph Avenue is walk you through some of the parking analysis that we did, because that was a big concern of residents. We did receive a petition from residents over the summer last year asking us that as part of the St. Joseph Avenue planning work that we were doing, that we look at parking issues in the area to see if it made sense to expand a more formal or more aggressive parking preservation program for the neighborhood. So as part of that, we did a parking survey, both a weekday and a weekend, where we went out to the corridor and looked at all the parking from as early as 7 a.m. I mean, we stayed out until about 9 p.m. So we were out for about 14 hours in a day, and we counted every car parked on each block for every hour of that 14-hour period. Because what we wanted to do is we want to figure out, for the people that are parked on the street, what are the cars that are parked 3 hours or less, because that's probably going to be parking intrusion, someone driving into the neighborhood parking to go to Rancho San Antonio Park. And we wanted to figure out who are the people that are parked 4 hours or longer, and because that's probably people that just live in the neighborhood and are just storing vehicles on the street. And then we wanted to do that for a long period of time to figure out, okay, who was here in the morning, and maybe they were residents that left to work, went to go run errands all day, and then we came back at nighttime. So we used that process to monitor traffic. So I'm going to walk you through just what we did. So as part of this parking survey that we did, we first figured out, well, how many parking spaces equivalent are on each street? We don't put parking tips on the roadway. So we measured between driveways and blocks to figure out how many cars could be parked on the street. So in this example here, which is the very last block of St. Joseph Avenue approaching the park, there's the equivalent of 5 spaces on the north side of the street, and there's no parking allowed on the south side. So that's why you're seeing these dashes on the south side. But there's 5 spaces available. And when we got there in the morning for the first hour, there were 2 cars parked, and we identified those as resident vehicles because they didn't move all day. So we knew that those were residents parked on the street. And then we did that same count again the next hour, and we found, okay, there's now 5 cars parked on the street, and we see that one of those was we counted those as a resident because that was one of the cars from the previous hour that didn't move. If you're wondering how we could figure out in the prior hour how that's a resident, it's because that car came back later that day and parked the whole day. So that's what we counted as a resident parking space. But when we're looking at that, we see that of the 4 of 5 spaces, 80% of that is being impacted by parking intrusion to the park in that hour. And we did that whole same similar process for the whole day. And we did it again for the whole week, for a weekend day, and that we use that information to figure out what is the level of parking intrusion that happens, you know, on a typical weekday versus a typical weekend. And what we found was that a lot of the cars that were parked on the street were in fact resident-owned vehicles that didn't move all day, or that left and then came back and parked for long periods of the day, you know, more than 4 hours. And so what we found was that there was minimal outside parking intrusion on that one block, and found a very similar trend on all the blocks on St. Joseph Avenue. Now, there was definitely more parking intrusions on some blocks compared to others. That's not to say that there was no parking intrusion, but from the standpoint of the amount of parking intrusion, we found that to be minimal, to the point that it would not recommend a more aggressive parking preservation program beyond the maintenance and expansion of the existing resident-only parking signage. So that same process that we went through there, again, we did for the whole section of St. Joseph Avenue from Rancho San Antonio Park down towards the Laver Scott, which is the mid-block point up towards Montclair School. And we did it for all of Eva Avenue for both days. And what we're showing here in red is the most amount of vehicles that we saw as parking intrusion. Again, vehicles parked 3 hours or less on a block face. And this was the most amount of parking intrusion we saw in any given day on a weekday. Not necessarily all at 8 o'clock in the morning, some maybe at 8 o'clock, others may have been at 10, but for each block face that we're showing here, this was the most number of vehicles that we saw, that we noted as parking intrusion. So this was the weekday impact, and this was the weekend impact. Where we saw definitely the most intrusion was that, again, that very first block, people wanting to get as close as they can to the park entrance. The same thing up to the next block up near Longden. But really where we saw the most impact was visible impact was Kent. It's a short block. There's only residents fronts on one side of the street on the east side. So this whole west side just gets lined with parked vehicles throughout the day. And there are resident only parking signs, but they're really blocked by bushes. So we want to really expand the amount of signs that we place on that block face as part of this project to discourage people from parking in that area. So with that, what we're going to be doing at the staff level is closing the community outreach planning phase that we've been working on for the past almost a year, and really move on to the next steps of this project. That will include bringing on a civil consultant that we've already identified that will start work in February to do both the survey, topographic survey work, and design of a either sidewalk facility on St. Joseph Avenue between Robles Ranch to Eudora, and I can put that back on the map for you if you want me to highlight that out for you. And our intent will be to come back as early as February with some preliminary design concepts to share with you and the community. But we anticipate that design phase taking probably up to 2 months. But our goal will be to complete the design phase within about a 2 to 3 months max period, so we can put this out to bid at the same time that we do the street resurfacing bid, which will happen over the summer. So sometime mid to late spring, there'll be a bid package released for all of this work, and we have an expedited schedule to help meet that construction goal. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. But before I do that, let me just highlight for people where that sidewalk gap closure section is. Oh, try to go back up, I apologize. Within this area of red, the sidewalk gap closure would be between Robles Ranch to roughly Deodora. There's an existing sidewalk that ends on the north side of the street. So we want to see if we can either extend that sidewalk or do some type of an expanded roadway with shared bicycle pedestrian space. We don't know the best solution yet. We're going to figure that as part of the design process. And I do have the larger concept plan line drawing. If you're interested in seeing that, I can walk you through it. But with that, I'll end the presentation, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Jaime. All right, let's take questions from the commission. All right, if you don't raise your hand, I'm going to assume that you're not going to ask questions. All right, so going once before I turn it over to the public. Going twice. All right, I see no questions from the commission. So with that,
sorry, I was trying to find.
If you're a member of the public, please mute yourself. Thank you. All right, I'm going to bring in now 2 questions or comments from the public. So I got Wayne Whitlock first. Wayne, you got 3 minutes.
Hi there. Again, Wayne Whitlock, and I live on Longden Circle in Los Altos. So I'm up at the west end of the street that goes into Rancho San Antonio. And so the concerns that we've raised in the past, and there are lots of neighbors who I think share these concerns, but my concern is that the process so far hasn't adequately considered the parking impacts that we're dealing with here. And the survey, I think, is helpful to get an idea, but that was really a snapshot. Those of us who live here, there are days when trying to get out from Longden Circle onto St. Joseph is really difficult. And so we have real safety concerns about that. Trying to nudge your car out onto St. Joseph when there's so many cars parked, and it's not every day. There are lots of days, Saturdays and weekdays, when you drive out there and there's almost no one there. Other days when it's just jam-packed. And so a 2-day survey is just not representative of the actual concern, the condition that's out there. So we don't think adequate consideration has been given to the parking issue. Recognize it's challenging because everybody wants to be at the park and all that. But the other concern I have is that these streets, once you get past Scott and up closer to the park, these streets get narrower and narrower. And we're seeing, as pedestrians and bikers, those numbers increase. We're seeing, even greater risk, just people walking on the street and people driving. So somehow we've got to find a way to help everyone learn how to share these roads better. Bikers go too fast. Pedestrians walk out in the middle of the street. They kind of forget sometimes that this is actually the only way we have in and out of here driving in our cars. So it's just a challenge to deal with. And I think part of it is that, last year, I think people really were kind of encouraged to go up there, use the park from that location. And it got people in, I think, kind of worse habits, being maybe less considerate of other pedestrians, bikers, and drivers of cars. So I would just encourage you to give more consideration long-term to the parking issues. And thank you, though, for this. And we really appreciate your willingness to listen.
Thank you, Wayne. Next speaker, E.M. Montgomery.
Yes, thank you for giving us the opportunity to give feedback before the commission. Thank you, Jaime, for the update. I just want to open with a positive. I really have felt the city has done a great job of reaching out to our neighborhood and our community and soliciting feedback. We've had multiple meetings, I think 5 or 6 from the beginning of this process, and I've attended all of them. And I thought they were very helpful to getting a healthy discussion. I did want to say that I live a little further away from the entrance to Rancho than Wayne does, but not that much further away. I'm on St. Joseph, kind of across from St. Joseph Court. And I would echo his feedback that, and I think this came out at the last meeting we had in early November. I've lived here 20 years, and I applaud the city for doing the survey. It takes a lot of time and effort and work to do that, and it's tedious. But I don't think the 2 days of doing that sufficiently reflects what occurs year-round here in the area. And I can honestly say there are days when it is very challenging. I have to back out of our driveway, kind of coming off of a blind curve. And so I just wanted to say I agree with Wayne's point about maybe a little more consideration to a way we could get a better handle on the parking situation. But I do appreciate the work that's already been done. Thank you. And then secondly, the final thing I want to point out is when I try to get out my driveway and drive down St. Joseph toward Eva to get out of the community, it's become shockingly difficult to avoid really walkers that are taking the middle of the street. I'm not talking cyclists. I encounter a lot of pedestrians taking the middle of the road on both sides when I head out and when I come back in. And the thing that shocks me about it, my husband and I, our family, were avid cyclists. I don't understand. There's no need really. There is enough shoulder that you can safely be adjacent to parked cars and not need the main lane that the cars come in and out on. So I wanted to put that before the commission and before the city. Is there any way we can have some signage or direct the pedestrians to do something a little more sensible and a little more courteous? I'm always really sensitive to sharing the road, whether it be with a cyclist, a car, or a walker. Maybe because I bike and we hike a lot, but I just feel like there's a little bit of a civility or sensibleness has been lost, and the cars do still need to access the street to get in and out. Even I always go slow and I'm very careful, but it's sometimes frightening. I just can't do it easily. It takes a long time and it's a little nerve-wracking to deal with that. But that's all I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joe Etter, next, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Jaime mentioned that the plans were updated. Are those plans posted online for viewing?
Thanks, Joe. We'll get these posted tomorrow on the project webpage. We haven't posted the drawing that we shared tonight online yet. No.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Joe. Next is Jim Rozak. Jim? Okay, I'm gonna go next. The next one, M. Zimmerman.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I basically want to echo what Wayne and Elizabeth have been saying. I live on Margarita Court at the corner of St. Joseph, so I see all the traffic going up to the park from my window, and also when I try to drive down the street. So again, the parking situation has really gotten much worse. Weekends are just horrible, and bicyclists are already riding 2 or 3 abreast in the lane. I'm worried that this is going to become standard procedure with the bicycle boulevard signage. And as Elizabeth says, pedestrians are also walking 2 or 3 or more abreast. They don't necessarily follow the rules of facing traffic when they're walking. I'd like to see if the police could perhaps work with the town crier and just do a little re-education on how to walk and bicycle on city streets when we don't have the proper signage or the proper sidewalks.
Great, thank you. Any further comments or questions from the public? It's your last chance.
I live on the corner of Eva
Okay, go ahead.
Avenue and Granger, and there's a solid white line that was painted in the last half year. Think of that as a pedestrian walkway. They seem to think of it as a right turn lane for cars.
Okay, is that a question or a comment, Russ? Hello? Okay, all right.
It's more of a comment.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions from members of the public? Or the rest?
Yes, this is Jim Rozak. I have one about the bike boulevard. I thought that was one of multiple options on Eva and going up towards the preserve. And it seems like it is now the only option. Is that correct? And if so, how did that take place? I've been listening for over a year.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Doug, you're next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. First, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about this. I agree with the parking. You know, I look out my window. I happen to be along St. Joseph, and I do see cars that are parked there. Some days more than others, but I'm wondering. So if you've ever gone for a walk into St. Joseph, into Rancho San Antonio along St. Joseph, there's a stretch where the side of the street has a very, I want to call it a steep angle into the curb. And what you find is that most, probably some of the comments that people made about people walking in the middle of the street are because they're seeking to not walk on a steep part of the driveway, or street rather, but they push into the center, or they walk on the other side, and, really in the wrong direction of traffic, depending on which way you're walking. And I'm wondering if you've taken a notice at the structure of the roads themselves, because there is maybe a 2-house section which has a very steep side on it. That's my comment.
Thank you, Doug. All right, last call for members of the public. Going once, going twice. All right, with that, I bring it back to the commission for comments and feedback. Who would like to go first? I'm sure you guys are going to have some feedback. Come on. It's not that late either. Suzanne.
Just some feedback overall. I really appreciate the city's outreach, willingness to work with the neighbors, and the level of detail and care for the parking surveys. It is impossible to capture a river in a cup. And that's what they're trying to do by taking a snapshot of the parking situation. There's no way any study can capture what the residents actually experience. So we can only do the best that we can do by mitigating the parking impacts of visitors. And maybe that's increased citations, maybe that's signage, I don't know. Aside from issuing parking permits like they do at the high school, I don't know of a real effective way to manage that. And maybe that's something to consider. Neighborhood parking permits for that street, and everybody else gets towed. Those are really my only comments tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. Other comments?
I can give some comments if you would like.
Stacy, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have several comments, but I will try to be succinct on these. So first, I just want to say thanks to Jaime and staff on this project. I know a lot of time has been put in listening and addressing residents' comments along the way, because I also have listened in to all the community meetings that have taken place regarding this street. So first comment, green paint. You have lots of it by the school. You don't have enough of it as you near the expressway, especially in the conflict points, say starting before Diodora and then on towards the expressway. The second thing is, please avoid making a shared use bike and ped facility between whether it's Granger or Capistrano and Robles Ranch. You need a dedicated bike space and a pedestrian space. That is uphill, it's headed towards the school, and at least 3/5 of the school attendance area feeds into that, including children who've been released from the Foothill Expressway traffic signal who are biking through at the same time, different ages and abilities, 5th grade boys, 1st grade little kids. So just please think of that when you plan that facility. Number 3, I'm concerned about the proposed addition of the stop sign at the raised crosswalk in front of the school. I'm afraid it's going to create congestion in and out of the school parking lot at drop-off and pickup time, particularly drop-off time. And then it also creates an additional stop sign on that flow of kind of starting at Scott and Laver to Stonehaven. So if you're proceeding with that, I would go with a pilot for 1 or 2 months and reevaluate it before you make it a permanent thing. I think there's other raised crosswalks like the one on Grant Road by St. Simon that don't have stop signs at all sides at them. So just consider that. The next one is where it's needed, please consider, like across from the school, please consider a sign similar to the one you have on Almond Avenue that says it's illegal to pass in the bike lane. I think that's really important. The next one I have is between, let's see, Scott and Laver and Ava on St. Joseph. There's lots of parked cars here, and similar when we discussed for Covington Road, there's no curb and gutter on this part of the street. Can we ask that cars park off the shoulder a little bit so we make space for the cyclists in the shoulder part of the roadway? There's a lot of little kids here headed to an elementary school, and biking in the middle of the road is not really the best place, I think, to put them, but having the parked cars move over so they have some space would be really nice thing. In terms of stop bars, if I looked at the diagram correctly, you have stop bars at every intersection where you have a stop sign, except Granger, where it intersects with St. Joseph. There used to be one there. It wasn't put back in the resurfacing project that's been raised before, but maybe when you do the St. Joseph project, you could get it back. Just wrapping up here, in terms of future sidewalk repair, I would also look at the segment between Knoll and St. Joseph. The condition is poor, and I know of a kid on the way back from school who has fallen and gotten hurt there. And I think also maybe a sidewalk gap closure across from the school between Knollwood and the St. Joseph Triangle area. It's really kind of 2/3 of a block there has it, and the rest of the third of the block doesn't. And I think that would be worth considering. And then finally, I think I saw in the staff report, it was talking about a high visibility crosswalk for St. Joseph and Ava that's coming from the Montclair improvement plans. But I didn't see that in the drawing that was posted. So maybe, Jaime, if you could take a look at that and see if something needs to be added there. Regarding the parking, I think it's an empathetic situation. I think there's a lot of people from, the surrounding area that want to reach the park, whether it's on bike or foot or, and some people by vehicle, from all across Grant Park to, Woodland Acres to maybe Loyola Corners. And I think the more that we can make it friendly and safe for bicycles and pedestrians to reach that way, hopefully more people can go that way instead of in a vehicle. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Stacy. Steve.
Yeah, first, I'd like to thank all of the community participants who spoke this evening on this subject, because I think it's really important that both the commission and the staff really hear what your ongoing concerns are and assure you that everybody is really listening. From my vantage point, it seems the two really biggest issues among the speakers tonight and some of the letters that have come in have to do with parking and congestion. And I'd also like to thank Jaime and the staff for the work that they've done. There's been an awful lot of both surveying, outreach, and planning involved. And if I remember on the slides, Jaime, you're about to start a community outreach program prior to any development. And what I would encourage is that the two really big issues, which are congestion and parking, become focus points in that outreach program. And I think it would be great if staff were to think about what might mitigate those two issues in a way that would work both for park visitors as well as for residents to make it not onerous on either side, and to really communicate that well at those outreach meetings and see if we can find a solution that will work for everybody. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Steve. More comments? Cindy.
Thank you. I think there are some comments, multiple people commented on, the traffic study not being super accurate or not representing what they have been experiencing what the community has been experiencing there. And so my comment or suggestion is to staff is maybe, if we just assume that, when you're looking at the numbers that you have, if the parking numbers were double that or triple that, what would we need to change, and what would the scenarios be? So on a, heavier weekend or a warm sunny day, and if the numbers were double that, what's kind of the threshold that would cause you to want to think about, the possible mitigation or other solutions that we would need to consider. So what is that threshold, and are there any things that we can kind of build into the plan so that it can accommodate a little bit more traffic? Not accommodate, that we have solutions that can address or avoid that from happening. But I also agree with Vice Chair's comment that there are a lot of people from the surrounding neighborhoods who do want to use and access the park, and we want it to be a welcoming space as well. And so I think my comment around that is just that if we can create a space that is more dedicated for beds and bikes, and find a way to encourage people to stay in those spaces, that might ease some of the safety and congestion concerns that people have, because we heard that it's hard to get your vehicle out, or it's hard to make a turn, and people are really concerned about safety, whether they are a ped or bike or in a car. And so if we can create some spaces that people can more clearly kind of stay in, depending on what their mode of transportation, and that might be able to create a little bit more safety and comfort for everyone using the park or using the street to access the park. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Any more comments? All right, so my closing thoughts. I've been on this commission for 6 years, and I think this is the first time ever that I've heard the community sort of say, fantastic outreach. Thank you for a great outreach. So clearly you've done something right here in outreach. I would say grab that recipe and make it a template for future outreaches. So 2 issues at stake. First one is parking, and the second one is congestion. I think Steve hit it on the head. So let's talk about parking. It sounds like a sample of 2 days is insufficient. So you may want to go back and increase your sampling number of days and look at what happens in different days, perhaps different seasonal issues, and then try to capture from the community those days where they feel are the most congested. Perhaps it's a weekend, perhaps a different day of the year. But so capture that, and let's sort of see the delta between those lulls and the congestion days. What are we talking about? How many more cars do we see? What creates that sensation that the folks feel that they cannot leave their homes easily, and the sense of parking and congestion is overwhelming. The second problem is tricky. How do you separate cars from bikes, from pedestrians on a residential street? That is really tricky. And maybe Suzanne's suggestion about, or Stacy, a suggestion about more green paint, or perhaps some striping that can separate the pedestrians from the bikes and keep them within designated areas on the streets. I don't know what the answer is, but this is not an easy one, especially for a dead-end street like St. Joseph. But I think my view is keep the dialogue with the residents. I think they understand the problem better than anyone else. They may not have it quantified, but they live it every day. And I think to the extent that you can keep that dialogue with them and keep digging with them and really grab that input from them and begin to synthesize the picture. They're not going to synthesize the picture for you, but they're going to be another input for you. And if you can capture all of that and begin to create a picture out of it, that's going to be really helpful. So at least to the extent that there are some real problems, we can identify them And to the extent there are perceptions of problems, we can also separate them out. And I think that's sort of what I would say I would recommend that you do for it. But again, really, congratulations on forming that proper channel with the residents and begin to create that dialogue. Is that useful, Jaime?
And Chair Nadeem, I would also add that there's been a strong dialogue with the Montclair school community as well that staff has had. And I would encourage them to continue that dialogue as well too.
Awesome, that's wonderful. Look, I mean, this is, by the way, I would even say, Jaime and Marissa, just figure out what you did right there so we can apply it throughout the whole city and not just simply St. Joseph. You know, what is it that's been done there? Okay, fantastic. So with that, I am ending item number 4 and we move to item number 5, staff report for items not on the agenda.
Thank you, Chair.
By the way, I'm sorry, Jaime, before I cut you off here, if you have any comments that you'd like to add before we close item number 4, I'm open to that.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just want to thank the Commission and thank all the residents that participated tonight and anyone that participated in the past. I think it is a really good thing to continue the dialogue that we've started with residents here. We did do parking collection, data collection in the spring. We did it again in the fall. And in the fall, we did a longer period of time based off concerns that we didn't do enough time collection in the spring. I do think that when this project is done, that there might be a need to continue to do more monitoring. We've got good baseline data now, and that can help us look for any additional trend changes, whether they're trending in a bad way where we're seeing more intrusion and maybe we do need to consider some additional parking measures, or if we're being stagnant, or if the other things that we do are helping reduce that intrusion. So I do want to thank everyone for their input. This is not done. We are going to move into a design phase for the sidewalk gap closure project. I do think it is going to be the city's preference to provide dedicated sidewalk facilities from bicycle facilities. I think that was a comment that we heard from Stacy, if I remember correctly. That is the city's goal. I think we're just gonna have to come up with some cost options to see what's feasible, but that is the city's preference. So with that, thank you all for your input. And back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so with that, we go to item number 5. Marissa, I think the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nadeem. This is the staff update item.
Yes.
Okay, so I do have some updates to share with everyone. One is regarding the Complete Streets Master Plan. The Complete Streets Master Plan went back to City Council to ask for approval for a slight budget increase, and that was approved, and so that will give us enough funding to be able to incorporate all of the comments that we received. We had the comment period open for a number of months, as you recall, and we received quite a number of very thoughtful comments and feedback from the community and from all of you and from council and from various other entities, the Climate Action Plan Committee and a few others. So we really wanted to incorporate all those because I know a lot of everyone's time and effort went into them. So that's what we'll be moving forward on, and all those revisions will be made. New sections added, executive summary, glossary of terms, etc. Everything that we've talked about at length in the past. So that's exciting. And the final version will go back to City Council for another study session, and that will be at the end of March. And as far as Questa, we have sent plans and diagrams to the fire department, and they're reviewing them. And we are hoping to hear back from them soon so we can move forward on that. So expect to hear more on Questa very soon. We are also putting together a request for qualifications for the streetscape design for First Street downtown. I know that's something we've all talked about a lot over the years as well. So that's underway, and we're looking forward to getting started on that project. Goals for 2022, that was one of the consent items for tonight. I know in the past those were sent to City Council in advance of their staff retreat, or retreat, I guess, council retreat, and we wanted to do that this year as well. And then we found out that the City Council is not going to be addressing goals again at the council retreat. They did it last year, and so they focused on other topics. So we will be sending our goals as a commission to City Council. We'll still be sending them. The council will still be kind of deliberating how to set their goals when they talk about budgeting, and that'll be in a couple of months. So our goals will go to them in plenty of time for that to happen. Those are my updates for now.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other items that we should be thinking about here ahead of next month's meeting, Marissa?
Items that you should be thinking about for next month's meeting.
I'm not talking about agenda items, but more concerns that you have that we should be thinking about ahead of the next month or two.
I don't think anything outside of what we've already discussed. We are kind of still looking at the Almond Avenue area. And so that's kind of on our minds. And that's something we've talked about, and that'll come back as a future item. You know, Cuesta, like we've talked about, CSMP. Yeah, I think you already know about everything to think about.
All right, thank you. Stacy.
Yes, I have a question for Marisa and or Jaime. Can you give us an update on the El Camino Real project? I just happened to look back in my notebook, and if I took notes correctly, I thought we were supposed to have the city approvals off to Caltrans this month, the policy approvals, so they could move forward in their planning. If you could just give us an update where we're at with the overall El Camino project.
Yes, that's a good question. I had a number of discussions with Caltrans regarding that project at the end of last year, and they had kind of a few just subtle changes to, excuse me, what they were needing from us and what they were asking for. And their timeline had also shifted. So I know last year we were preparing to bring that to council, you know, by the end of the year. It was supposed to go to council a few different times, and at the end of last year. And it got, you know, kind of pushed back for various reasons. And then once we talked to Caltrans in depth, what they were asking for, just in terms of kind of the technical, you know, documents and exact framing of the questions, was a little bit different than they'd previously communicated to us. So we got some clarity through those conversations, and I'll be bringing it to council soon. And the timeline was no longer required for January, so they had a little more flexibility in their timing. So we talked about that too.
Great, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I just have one question, Marissa. You mentioned that you're going to be updating and adding some sections to the master plan, and that will go to the council in March. Is there an interim step there for that to be reviewed with our commission before it goes to the council, the new stuff that is? Or will we have a chance to see it and provide feedback?
Yeah, it will get, so the draft, once it's done, will be posted again publicly, and we could bring it back to the Complete Streets Commission. What I recall from our last discussion on it was that you all provided your feedback, and I think that what we decided was that you approved kind of sending it to council at that point with your, you know, with your feedback noted. And so that was the plan, was to just take it back to council for adoption because we have your feedback and we will be incorporating it.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were writing some new stuff and making additional revisions.
Right, all the revisions that we'll be making were what came out of the public comment and the CSC comment period. So everything that you all recommended and asked for as revisions will be incorporated, and that's what will be going to council, and along with council's requests.
Okay, and that will be up on the website so we can review it prior to that.
Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Suzanne? Yeah.
I just have a report item, not a question from Marissa. Let me know when that time is right.
Go ahead.
Okay, on January 14th, I attended a Zoom meeting hosted by the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and SVBC on a Peninsula Bike Super Highway. And this is something they're proposing for El Camino Real. It drew over 75 participants. I did speak in that meeting. I did characterize my feedback as an individual citizen, though I did note that I was part of the Complete Streets Commission. Very interesting meeting, very vibrant and active, intriguing branding for a super highway. So I would say watch this space. And it has a lot to do with the comments that you just made, Marissa, about the changes that Caltrans is proposing for El Camino Real. We'll just see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds like we're now in the next section, which is commissioner reports or comments. Any other comments from the commissioners?
I have some.
Stacy?
Okay, thank you. I have a couple things. The first one is I just want to let everyone know that I'm serving as the VTA BPAC chair for this calendar year. The next one is TSCN, the Traffic Safe Communities Network. I've been doing that one for a couple years. It's the quarterly meeting. If anyone else has any interest in doing that, I'm happy to seek other volunteers to take that job. And if anyone wants to talk to me offline about it, you can. It's a quarterly meeting. It's weekdays, usually at 10 a.m. Used to be in person pre-COVID in San Jose for 2 hours. During COVID, it's been online for an hour, and they're moving it to an hour and a half starting next month. And if you want, and this is one where you can just listen in. So you could listen in next month to see if this is something you want to do. So feel free to reach out to me. The next one I have is I have a couple things that I want to send out to the commission as a whole. I know in the past we've sent them to staff and then staff has sent them out. One I already sent to staff, which was about a webinar that took place today actually, and I'm not sure that it got out to everyone. But it was about the federal transportation infrastructure bill and funding. And I attended the webinar today. It was quite good, but there was a lot to absorb. And then the next one that I need to send to staff and have them send out to everyone is about MTC, and they're in the process of updating their complete streets policy, and people may want to send them feedback on that. And then I think I'll finally say from the VTA BPAC perspective, VTA has applied for a grant to improve their VMT policies. They'll find out in the spring if they get that grant. If they do, the work scope will take a couple years, but some of the things that they applied for the grant in are things that our commission has been interested in, like TDM and other things like that. So it would be good if they get that grant. And then hopefully in February, the BPAC will approve, and the board the month thereafter, the new bicycle guidelines. So I'll let you know when those come.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners or reports? Okay, so Stacy, I think you reminded me of something I should have done earlier, and that is since the work plan now has been approved by the commission, there's no need to actually maintain the subcommittee. So I am actually hereby disbanding that subcommittee. I want to thank you, all the members of the subcommittee, for your contributions. I'm sure that was a lot of work, but thanks a lot for your contributions and also for drafting the letter to the City Council. Okay, so with that, we move to the last item, which is future agenda items or ideas for future agenda items. Steve, I know you have a few.
I just have one thing came up tonight that I've also been thinking about, and one of the community members mentioned the fact that there was a high-speed, heavy-duty e-bike that was going back and forth on the path to Palo Alto on the Hetch Hetchy Trail. And last week I had a demo from my son of his new e-bike that has wide tires. It's pretty spiffy looking, but is capable of going 28 miles an hour. And I know he'll be riding it from his house in a neighboring community to my house along bike trails. And what it made me think about is that maybe we need to be thinking about not just one bike trails, but all our bike trails and the kind of signage that we want to have on those bike trails going forward, knowing that there are going to be more and more electronic bikes with pedal assist. This one has pedal assist, but it's not necessary. You can ride just as a throttle driven vehicle. And how do we want to manage those bike trails for safety reasons for not only pedestrians, but other cyclists and the people on the e-bikes? So I think that's worth a discussion.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think we should think about what kind of bikes we want to have on the bike trails and which ones belong on the street, which ones belong on the bike path. But some food for thought there. Suzanne.
Something to consider for a future meeting is a discussion more broadly with the city and staff about what types of supporting programs, engineering, and infrastructure we're going to need to wrap around these high-density developments that have low parking for both bikes and vehicles, and to manage the spillover and to ensure that the residents experience a positive living environment and that the surrounding neighborhoods aren't negatively impacted by said developments. The ones that come into concern are the ones that we've recently reviewed, where they have met the minimum as far as parking is concerned. And they've met the minimum as far as bicycle parking is concerned. But the total parking units, if you will, is far less than the total number of inhabitants. So there is a mismatch there. And I think it's time for the city to start thinking about how do we put wraparound services nearby or adjacent to these density developments.
Indeed. I think this whole issue of policy, city policy around development and traffic and parking has been one that somehow seems to be lost as an orphan. I'm not sure exactly who owns what anymore. I think we need to figure that out quickly. What the commission should do, what city staff should do, what city council should do. That's a very big issue, and the more we punt, the more we see developments, and the more difficult that question becomes. So we need to really make it urgent and figure out who should own it, or perhaps become the catalyst to drive it forward. Great. Other suggestions for agenda items? Okay, so with that, it was just a bit shy of 8 o'clock. I want to thank you all for your contributions tonight. Good night, and this meeting is adjourned at 7:56 p.m.
Good night.